Hello, welcome to Indie Tutorials. My name is Guillermo and I would like to thank the patrons supporting this channel. Okay, so let's continue and let's go back to the scene view. We already saved this player prefab, and let's open up ORK editor. Okay, so when we installed the framework, it was nice enough to build some equipment slot for us. So we have already the weapon, shield, armor, helmet, shoes and accessory. So let's check it out, the helmet itself, so what we can reuse from here. And actually, well, we can leave it everything as it is, nothing to change here for now. And then if we click in the equipment section, we have the default equipment created for us. So let's start by renaming this default. So click here in edit text in the all settings section or content information if you were there, and let's call this one helmet A. So I will keep this naming convention just because to remember what I'm talking about, or remember which mesh I need to equip or unequip. Of course, you will come up with some better names for your game. And let's click OK so we can see the name here. Let me see, if we were to go through all these subsections, content information, this is what we change. In the item settings, since we are not using the equipment viewer, because we don't need the equipment viewer, the mesh is already in our character hierarchy, we are going to leave everything as it is. But if you were to or wanted to have this helmet be a droppable item, then you probably could do is to use this item prefab and set it with just the mesh. So let me show you quickly what I'm talking about. Let me move this out of the way and let's click on the player prefab once again. So from here, since we have this mesh object, we cannot change the original FBX, but from here this is already a game object. So let me just make it visible. You could at any point drag this object and make a prefab out of it, and then use this prefab to display in the scene object. You can see that it's using a material. The root bone has lost, but you are only care about to have something to show. So in this case, this is the mesh, and if we go to the mesh itself, this is the FBX. This is the thing that you want to be shown as a droppable item to pick up, or something like that, right? But okay, let's go back to what we are doing here. Let me undo all these things and let me unpack this prefab that was created from this object, and let me bring back the ORK editor from the other screen. So we were in the item settings. In the UI settings, I don't think no, nothing to change here. Equipment settings, this is where all this can be wrong. So what we need to check here is in the equipment slot set 0. This is created by default. So we have the first slot set, and it's asking us to select the slot set type. So we don't have a template, so I'm going to choose here custom. After custom, I will keep the equip type to single, and you can click on the name to get the documentation or the comments about what this does, or the difference between single or multi, or multi-type, equip type. And down below, we want to, in the equipable on, we want to add equipment slot, and from here equipable on again, and we select the helmet. So this helmet A is going to be equipped in the helmet slot, equipment slot. Okay, moving on to the next section is the level settings. And here is where we are going to manipulate or create a couple of schematics to equip and unequip our helmet, or to let's say to hide or show the mesh instead, okay, when this helmet is equipped or unequipped. Later on, of course, we are going to be playing with the effect modifiers and equipment abilities for this helmet and so on and so forth. But for the time being, let's just save these changes so we can save our new helmet A equipment. And the next step before start building the schematic is to let the combatant use this or know about this helmet equipment. Okay, so let's click on the combatants tab and then select the combatants once again, and finally the player combatant. And from here we need to click on the inventory and equipment, and from here we have the inventory and equipment. Scroll down, so in the available equipment, and remember to always, if you for any reason have these nodes collapsed, just remember to uncollapse them or to making them visible, because sometimes there are hidden important properties that we might miss. So once again, so we are in the inventory and equipment. We have the available equipment, and by default is set to available equipment to default. In this case we want to change this to custom, and the available slot is set to all equipment slot. But pay attention, because in the available equipment what is checked by default is exclude equipment. So anything that we add here is going to be excluded, and I don't know the reason for that, but let's uncheck this exclude equipment in this case. And here we need to add equipment, and from the equipment slot we now can pick up the helmet. If we were not added a template type to the helmet itself, we were not going to be able to select it from here. And by that I mean, if we were going back to the helmet equipment, remember in the content information, I believe, nope, equipment settings, yeah, a slot set type to custom. This is where it was asking us for a template, create slot set template, you know. So if you don't select or apply a template any sort, either the custom or template, you are not going to be able to add this equipment to your combatant. And of course we have the general settings. So if you were or you wanted to have all the equipment for all the combatants, you could just add this at this level, and they all will have this equipment in their inventory, or not in the inventory, but available for them to have them in the inventory and then be equipped. Okay, so let me save the settings once again, and let's go to the schematic part. So let's go to the schematic tab here, and from here what we want to do is, of course, let the ORK framework know that we are dealing with or using the schematic object is our ORK player, because we want a hard reference to be able to find the sub meshes or the child game object out of the parent combatant component. And for that we want to scroll down and let's add an actor. This actor is going to be of type ORK player, and before moving forward let's save this schematic. So let's add a new folder in the schematics folder. Let's add here equipments, and once again I will use a meaningful name that I can remember later on, so I will just say this is going to be the equip schematic, right? So equip helmet A, and I like to put the schematic last name, so let's save it. Now we have our schematic saved. We can build the logic. What we're going to use is a node called select game object. So let's right click here and start typing select game objects. So this node is going to find or try to search a child object in our mesh, our game object, sorry, and store it with a data key internally in this schematic. Alright, so I will use here for the data key name, let's select helmet, lowercase will be fine. Let's leave the data origin to local and the change type to set. So we are setting this key right now. Now for the game object settings, we want to use, instead of the machine object, we are going to set our actor as the object. We want to start searching from the root, and the path that we want to search for is going to be the path where we have this helmet A mesh. So let me bring up quickly the prefab once again. You will see that we have the root player, then we have this mesh child game object, then we have this male game object as well, and finally we have the helmet A. So the path is going to be something like mesh slash male slash helmet A. But this already defines the generic approach that we want to use when dealing with the female. So instead of this game object be called male, let's rename it and let's call it model. So both the female and the male character FBX will have the model instead of male or female, and then later on in the character customization we can just add to this empty mesh game object this child, either the male or the female. Will be easy to handle, and then we can have here a more generic approach. So let's call this one model to let ORK Framework find this child object. So we want to do the same thing to store these child objects in other data keys. For example, for the hair and the beard, what we can do here, first of all, of course, link the nodes so they can run together. And let's copy this one, copy and paste, copy. So we have bird 1, 1, 2, 3, 4 objects to hide, right? So let's do this 4 times, or before copying this, let's modify here some things. For example, the data key, in this case I will call it hair. And remember, the select game objects, this is plural, so they can have all the same key and they will be stored in a list of game objects. Okay, so let's move down, and in this case, instead of helmet 1, we want the bird 01. So let me just F2 to be able to copy the right name. This is really risky if you misspell something. Now that we have the first one for the hair, now we can copy and paste this 4 times for each game object you might have in your character. And let's link it up. So we were setting the bird 1, so let's do the same for bird 20. I just type here 20, and we have hare 01, F2, and let me copy here 01, and here will be 20. And let me save the changes before something bad happens. So now that we have our game object list being created after it's found this game object, and if it doesn't found any, you will get no error, no warning, nothing, just it won't be able to find it. So it won't be added to this list. The next step, of course, is to set the helmet to active, because we now have it on active. Right click and activate game object. Sorry, activate object in this case. Let's link it up with the last node, and the game object by default it says deactivate, right? Because where is it? Set active is set to false, it's not ticked or not checked. But of course, what we want to do in this case, first of all, to check it, so set active. Then the object that we want to look for or set active is not a machine object, but is a selected data. So let's, for the drop down, select the data, and we want to pass the key. In this case, our key was helmet. So let's type here helmet. Again, if we were to have more items in this list, all of them will be activated, of course. Right? So after that, we want to check here only game objects. We only want to activate the game objects in this list, nothing else. And we can leave everything as it is, and let's copy or duplicate this node, link it up, and when we set the helmet active or visible, then we want to hide the rest of game objects in the hare data key list. So let's do the opposite here. So we want to uncheck set active, and the selected data we want to uncheck in this case is hare. So let's save our changes once again. Now comes the tricky part about how to test these things, right? First of all, of course, we need to add this schematic to the equipment that we saw before. So let's go to equipment, helmet, level settings, and we have this equip schematic. So let's find out equip helmet A schematic. Let's test before building the unequip. Let's test this one. So let me save the changes once again, and I was mentioned that it's a little bit tricky, not tricky but tedious, in the way that if you wanted to press a key just to test, quick test equipment or unequipment settings, then you will need to go to the base control and create an input key just for that testing. So what I did is to write a small script that we can attach to the combatant component, or sorry, the combatant player, and assign a schematic to quickly test something. So let's do that. Once again saving, let me close the editor and go ahead.